What happens when two ordinary sisters enjoying a quiet evening face off against a gang that doesn't know their true strength? The chaos that unfolds will shatter expectations and expose more than anyone saw coming. You won't believe how this battle for justice plays out. The air inside the small Chicago diner was warm and smelled of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon. Kayla and Tamara Johnson had chosen this spot for its quiet charm, a place to unwind. After weeks of intense military training, to anyone watching, they looked like two ordinary women enjoying a peaceful evening. Kayla, with her leather jacket and calm demeanor, exuded quiet confidence, while Tamara, in her crisp white hoodie, had an easy, approachable smile that softened her otherwise intense presence. As they sipped their steaming mugs, their conversation flowed effortlessly, stories of their missions, light jokes about who had the better aim, but their tranquil bubble burst when the door slammed open. The sharp sound cut through the dime like a slap, drawing every pair of eyes toward the group of men stomping inside, 5 of them, loud, obnoxious. Their laughter echoed off the walls, but there was nothing joyful about it. The leader, a man with a shaved head and the Confederate flag tattoo stretching across his forearm, sized up the room with the kind of smirk that sent a chill down your spine. When his eyes landed on the sisters, the smirk turned predatory. "Hey, look at this," he announced loud enough for even the cooks in the back to hear. Double trouble, huh? The diner atmosphere shifted in an instant. Conversation stopped, forks clinked against plates, and everyone suddenly seemed very interested in their food. The waitress, a young woman with a name tag that read Julie, froze behind the counter, her hand hesitating over the coffee pot. The only people who didn't react, Kayla and Tamara. They exchanged the glance, one of those wordless sibling looks that said everything. Kayla's eyes narrowed slightly, a silent reminder to stay calm. Tamara raised an eyebrow, a silent question. "Are we really doing this today?" The leader of the group wasn't done. One of his friends, a wiry guy with a patchy beard, stepped closer to their table, leaning his weight on the edge. "What are two girls like you doing here?" His tone was slick, oozing false charm. "Shouldn't you be somewhere else?" Caleb placed her mug down carefully, her movements deliberate and unhurried. She looked him square in the eye, her voice calm but steady. "We just here to have coffee. Move along." The man didn't budge behind him. His friends chuckled, their laughter low and mean. The leader strolled up and pulled out a chair, spinning it around before dropping into it. He leaned his elbows on the table, his grin wide but far from friendly. "You think you can just tell me what to do?" His voice was sharp, laced with mockery. "You got a smart mouth for someone who doesn't belong here." Tamara's hand tightened around her coffee cup, her knuckles white. The waitress shifted nervously behind the counter, her eyes darting between the group and the sisters. The tension was thick, the air crackling with unspoken threats. Kayla reached out and placed a hand on Tamara's wrist, a silent reminder to stay cool. She turned back to the leader, her voice even. "We don't want trouble. Let's not make this worse than it needs to be." For a moment, it seemed like her calm demeanor might diffuse the situation, but the leader leaned back, laughing, a cold, hollow sound that made the other patrons sink lower in their seats. "Oh, you think you're in charge here?" He glanced at his crew. "Boys, I think we need to show these two who runs this place." The men began to close in, their voices growing louder, their taunts sharper. The room seemed to shrink as their presence grew oppressive, and yet the sisters did flinch. If anything, their composure only seemed to rile the men up further. One of the men reached out, his hand hovering toward Kayla's shoulder, a sneer twisting his face. That was the moment everything shifted. Kayla's eyes flicked to his hand just for a second, and in that split moment, the storm they had tried to avoid came crashing down. The instant the man's hand touched Kayla's shoulder, it was over for him. She didn't hesitate, her body moved like it had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in one swift motion. She grabbed his wrist, twisted it behind his back, and shoved him forward. The crack of his knees hitting the table rang out, followed by a sharp yelp of pain. The diner fell into a stunned silence for a split second. Even the hum of the refrigerator in the corner seemed to stop. Then chaos erupted. The leader, his ego now bruised beyond repair, lunged at Tamara with a roar that sounded more bark than bite. Tamar didn't flinch. She sidestepped with ease, her move smooth and deliberate, and with a calculated kick to his ankle, she sent him sprawling to the floor. His head bounced off the linoleum with an audible thud, and he let out a groan, his arrogance now replaced with a growing sense of confusion. "What the who are you?" "Two," he spat, his voice shaky as he scrambled to his feet, clearly realizing he was in over his head. Kayla didn't answer. She was already dealing with 2 of his crew, who had decided that sheer numbers might give them the upper hand. Spoiler, they were wrong. The first man swung wildly, his fist slicing through the air, but Kayla leaned back just enough to dodge. Before he could recover, she stepped in with a sharp elbow to his ribs, sending him stumbling into a booth. The second man tried his luck with a chair, lifting it high above his head, but Kayla ducked under it and countered with a jab to his gut. he folded like a deck of cards. Meanwhile, Tamara had her own challengers. One of the men, clearly emboldened by the chaos, pulled out a knife, the blade catching the flickering light above. Big mistake. Tamara's eyes narrowed. As she stepped forward, closing the distance faster than he could react, she grabbed his wrist, twisted it, with just enough force to make him drop the weapon, then shoved him backward. The knife skidded across the floor, coming to a stop under the counter where the waitress had taken cover, phone clutched in her shaking hands. The leader, now visibly panicking, tried to rally what was left of his crew. "Don't let them," when he shouted. But his voice cracked. The confidence that had dripped from every word earlier was now gone, replaced by something close to desperation. He grabbed a glass bottle from a nearby table and hurled it at Tamara, hoping for an easy hit, but Tamara caught it midair. Like she was snatching a fly, she placed it down on the table gently, almost mockingly, her eyes locking onto his with a quiet, simmering intensity. "You're outmatched," she said, her voice low and steady. "Walk away while you still can." The words hit him harder than any punch ever could. His crew, now battered and bruised, started retreating, dragging their injured comrades with them. The leader hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting between Kayla and Tamara as if calculating his chances. Spoiler, they were zero. But just as they reached the door, the wail of sirens filled the air, growing louder with every second. A pair of squad cars screeched to a stop outside, and within moments officers poured in, guns drawn and voices sharp. "Hands up, nobody move." Kayla and Tamara exchanged a glance. Of course it had come to this. They raised their hands slowly, their faces calm and unreadable, as they tried to explain the situation to the officers. But it didn't matter, despite the testimonies of the few brave witnesses who spoke up, and the waitress still shaking behind the counter. The sisters were cuffed, and L outside. The gang, meanwhile, received noticeably lenient treatment. A few were taken aside for questioning, but none were cuffed. The leader, now sporting a smug grin, walked past the sisters. As he was loaded into the back of a squad car, he leaned in close enough for only Tamara to hear. "You haven't seen the last of us," he whispered, his voice dripping with venom. Tamara's jaw clenched, but she said nothing. Kayla gave her sister a subtle shake of the head. This wasn't the time, but as they were loaded into the back of another car, the look in Tamara's eyes said this wasn't over, not even close. The police station was suffocatingly cold, with officers interrogating Kayla and Tamara as if they were the criminals. Their military backgrounds became the focus of every question, framed like a weapon instead of an accomplishment. "So special forces, huh?" one officer sneered, flipping through a file. "That explains your approach." Kaya's response was calm, but sharp. "My approach? You mean defending myself when attacked? Isn't that what you're supposed to do?" Across the hall, Tamara dealt with the same condescension. "Your training makes you dangerous in situations like this," her interrogator suggested. She let out a humorless laugh. "Dangerous? The only danger that night was 5 grown men harassing us. Funny how you're not asking them about their choices." Meanwhile, Ray Dixon, the gang leader, used his connections to spread a twisted version of events. Edited footage painted Kayla and Tamara as aggressors, sparking headlines that ignored the gang's provocations. But the sisters weren't staying quiet. Tamara called their commanding officer, who activated powerful allies. Within hours, unedited footage, eyewitness testimonies, and security recordings surfaced, revealing the gang's attack in its full ugly truth. Social media exploded. Justice for the Johnson sisters went viral, and public outcry forced local news to backtrack. The sisters didn't stop there. At a press conference, they calmly dismantled the lies. "We defended ourselves because no one else would," Kayla said, her voice steady. "And now we're being vilified for refusing to stay silent." Tamara added, "This isn't just about us, it's about every black woman who's had to fight to be heard." The shift was seismic. Under pressure, the police department apologized and dropped all charges. Days later, federal agents arrested Dixon and his crew on charges of assault, hate crimes, and conspiracy. The footage of Dixon in handcuffs, his smirk replaced with fear, was broadcast nationwide. Sitting on their porch, the sisters watched the sunset, the battle behind them. But far from forgotten. "You think they'll stay scared?" Kayla asked, a small smile on her lips. Tamara's gaze was steady. "No, but we're ready for whatever's next."